Hello and welcome back to Parley. This prompt was written by Quartermaster Sea. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about Crystallize, the geo-elemental reaction in Genshin Impact. Quartermaster Sea says, looking at the possible elemental reactions in Genshin Impact, Geo as an element is noticeably lacking in that it only offers Crystallize. Assuming the developers are likely to keep Crystallize in the game to avoid having to reprogram anything or trip over spaghetti code, what elemental combinations do you think should proc Crystallize, and what kind of reactions would you like to see from other Geo combinations? Are there any Geo combinations you would like to not have reactions for? Yes. Great. I have a three-part parlay here. The first one is that I think you take it as a given that we're going to make more elemental reactions for Crystallize or for Geo, and I don't think that would be better, and I'm going to explain why or what I would do. Then we're going to make some different reactions, because I think by the way you worded this that you would like to hear about those. I certainly have some ideas. I just don't like them as much as the other option for that design. I'll explain why. And then third, I want to talk a little bit about some kind of forensic work for what's going on with this design, because the way that reactions are designed in Genshin Impact among elements, some elements have way more involved reactions, some less. But there's a weird, anyway, you'll see, that I would like to talk about. I think it's strange, and maybe it's useful to think why the developers did this may not be as straightforward as, you know, they had this or that design goal. So I think that'll be interesting. Let's start with, I don't really want more geo reactions. We'll begin by talking about, I guess, maybe my argument or an argument for why geo only has Crystallize and why that is potentially good design. That's separate, of course, from whether I or you like it, but I think it makes sense for Genshin Impact. And the reason is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's because I think the game is trying to have some elements that are less complicated than others because they're trying to appeal to a wide audience. Because Genshin Impact is trying to go broad rather than more specific, it kind of makes sense that the game has some reactions that matter or are meant to matter. We'll get back to that in a minute. But which are designed to be a lot less combo-y or build focused. The game is trying to be able to adapt to that. If you don't like making builds as much, or that's not something you're into, you're not interested in the complexity or whatever, you can just play this element and things just work. This is not only sensible because different players will prefer different amounts of complexity or whatever in their gameplay experience. I think it's also relevant because coming into a game that has a gachapon monetization system, well, these games vary quite widely. Some of them are the most pay-to-win, designless pieces of gameplay that you can possibly find in the gaming industry, where there is absolutely nothing to think about, no point in trying to make a specific build. They are quite literally pay to win. If you get the rarest characters, they're stronger and you win. You do not have to futz about with your team to make that work. And you see people posting about Genshin Impact in this same way, seeming to have made this misunderstanding. They'll show a team that, all the characters are on-field damage dealers that don't do anything if they're not in the field, and therefore they're essentially playing a team with only 1/4 of the possible characters. The team is, by any logical metric, just terrible, but they are conditioned not to expect that to matter in a game where you can pay to get stronger characters. Now, that's kind of not true in Genshin Impact, but it is a game that is following in the footsteps of a lot of games where that is true. So it kind of makes sense when you look at it that way, that they would make an elemental reaction that is very straightforward. On the other hand, there are a lot of games that have pretty involved, maybe more complicated and very, very nice, very fun, well-designed build systems in the space of games with this type of monetization. So the player might be coming from those as well. And the game offers something for both groups, if you want to look at it that way. We have Dendro reactions, which have multiple stages and lots of different interesting opportunity costs in their builds. And then Geo, where you could just slap a bunch of units together and Geo go burr. And they even have Geo Resonance, which kind of automatically gives you a resistance reduction on enemies. They take more Geo damage just for running a ton of geo units. Whereas other elements, when they want a resistance reduction, they usually have to build their team specifically to get it from somewhere. Viridescent Venerer, the Animo artifact set, you swirl the element you want to reduce resistance to, or there are some other weird options like Chevreuse. If your team is all Pyro and Electro, when you do a Pyro-Electro reaction, you reduce the resistance. The Geo way that you get that resistance reduction, or the most straightforward one, you literally just put a bunch of Geo units on the team. So I think it's pretty clear that the intention, not just my interpretation, but the intention from the game developer is that Geo is supposed to be a simpler reaction. It's trying to serve a purpose, a certain audience that wants it to be more straightforward. So if we were to change it, I agree that that is a potentially good game, but it is losing some very meaningful benefits from Genshin Impact's design, especially if you want to go wide. I would argue that Genshin Impact is kind of about having its toe in that pool. This is not the same depending on the game. If we use, Hades or Warframe as an example, the amount of kind of buildiness or synergy in the game for a given a god in Hades and their boons, or a weapon in Warframe, doesn't vary as much, I would argue, because that would be weird in those games. It's not what they're about. You can't really play Hades without your build being an interconnected mix of different gods. That just isn't part of the game. And so it would be weirder if one of the gods was way less focused on synergy with other gods. There are some that are a little less focused, I think. Artemis, for example, is just crits. And maybe those appeal a little bit to players that are having a little bit more trouble. I don't think that having a slight gradient in the complexity or combo-iness of your game pieces is a bad idea, really, in any game. It's not like every player who wants a specific I'm gonna make builds kind of experience wants the exact same amount of that, of course, right? But at the same time, those games are more specific. They're just more focused games. They're not trying to cast as wide a net. Even if they do, I'm looking at you, Warframe. And so sure, like they have a more focused type of design that wouldn't make as much sense in Genshin Impact, in my opinion. So I said that I didn't want to make a bunch of different reactions for Crystallize from like a game design perspective. I don't think that is what Genshin Impact is trying to do. It wouldn't really make sense. It's not like a design mistake or wrong for the game to have simple reactions for Geo. But that does not in any way mean that the reactions need to be bad, which they are. That doesn't really make sense. Crystallize is straightforward, but it's also not very good, which doesn't serve any purpose. There's really no need. My usual play as a game designer, some of you will know where I'm going already, is I'm going to say, why can't we have our cake and eat it too? And here I really don't see why we can't. It feels like you could make effects for Crystallize or just make Crystallize better, and that would make it relevant to more players without really meaningfully increasing its complexity. So let's do that briefly. And then again, because I think you think it would be fun, and that seems to be the premise of your parlay, and I think it'd be fun too. I'm just not sure I think it's better design. We will make a bunch of different reactions involving Geo as well. But first, let's do these. Okay, so what do you make better with Crystallize? We're 8 minutes in, and I haven't talked about what Crystallize does. You get a shield, and it scales with Elemental Mastery how durable the shield is. I think already an issue with Crystallize is that it doesn't increase your damage to build Elemental Mastery, which building defensive stats in Genshin Impact is almost always completely unnecessary, is one way to look at it. And maybe even more so if you're already playing a Geo team, which is probably a little more tanky, and the reaction gives you a shield. But in any case, I mean, shields are useful. And so the most straightforward thing you could do is make shields stack. They don't in Genshin Impact, of course. They generally, if you have two shields from different sources, they both take damage at the same time, which is pretty bad. They don't sit on top of each other and give you both of the shields benefit. You just get the biggest shields benefit, I guess. There are some that explicitly stack with themselves, like Toma's shields, but only with themselves. And other shields, if you refresh the shield, you have Crystallize and then you get another one, it just refreshes. It doesn't add it up. So a straightforward thing to do would be to make Crystallized shields stack perhaps 3 times their base. So they still scale with Elemental Mastery, but you can, stack them up to 3 times the strength of what one of them was. So building Elemental Mastery is stronger in that you can stack up that benefit a few times, and using Crystallize in general is stronger because you can pick up a few and get a stronger shield. Crystallize does have a somewhat undeserved reputation as being, like it doesn't give you much durability. That's not entirely true. The scaling with Elemental Mastery isn't too bad, but I just don't think the benefit is fully there. So I don't see why not. We can't add that. So they stack. You could also make all shields stack. I don't think that's the worst change for Genshin Impact generally. A lot of the time, it would be a pretty big cost to a team to make shield, like to specifically bring a bunch of units that give a strong shield. You'd lose a lot of, elemental application or damage or whatever. So it's not like it would be overpowered, in my opinion. And it would actually be a nice buff to some of those characters who sometimes it's awkward to fit them into a team because the main thing they bring is a shield and it just doesn't do anything if there's another shield on the team. So you could make Crystallized shields stack, and then also a further buff to some shields would be to make all shields stack on top of each other. So in other words, these just mean they line up on top of your health bar rather than overlapping each other. And then Crystallize itself can stack its own shield effect up a few times. That would already be a substantial buff and very easy to implement. My real play here, though, is to have some kind of like damage return effect, like a Thornmail effect, or when the shield takes damage, it pulses out damage based on your Elemental Mastery. I think this is extremely simple. It's easy to understand. A lot of shields or defensive effects in video games have often called like a Thorns or a Revenge effect, where you deal damage back to your attacker. I think in Genshin Impact it would be nice if it just did damage around you, like not to you. It doesn't matter where the damage comes from. Units that have an ability that damages them could have interesting synergy with this type of crystallized shield. Xiao reducing his own HP might send out pulses of damage or trigger that damage pulse thing. If you do burgeon reactions and they explode and the shield pulses out damage, you stand on fiery grass and it pulses out a bunch. It could be really cool. And it also just provides a simple damaging benefit for players that are, using the shield normally. They're just playing a bunch of Geo units, right? I'm particularly fond of this design because I think that it makes the shields more powerful for players that would benefit from that, for whom it's not a big balance problem. And it doesn't really make them that much more powerful for players that weren't using shields to begin with. It gives them something powerful to do. Geo can now be used for a damaging reaction. But if you're already making these involved teams, I reckon that the shield value itself is less important generally to you. Like, it matters less in the first place how much more tanky it makes you. Like, you're going to win the encounter, just not as fast because you're using Geo. So making the Geo shield do damage and protect you, like, you often won't be benefiting that much from the protection. And shields are good. I mean, it will still be beneficial. Geo has a long way to go, and you lose the opportunity cost of, all those other elemental reactions you could do. So I think it's fine to just give it both benefits. It scales its durability and the damage it pulses out when you take damage with Elemental Mastery. They stack up to 3 times their normal size, and maybe you could go even further and make shields in general stack in Genshin Impact. That would be my proposed change. Now, let's do the other way of doing it, basically. Though, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Let's just make different reactions for Geo. Greater Sea, I don't mean to nitpick Quartermaster Sea. I don't mean to nitpick at all when I say this, but it is also true that Geo really isn't noticeably lacking in a sort of abstract sense in Genshin Impact. It's just like Anemo. It has a regular reaction with Pyro, Electro, Cryo, and Hydro that does the same thing with all of them. It's just that the thing Geo does doesn't really have anything to do with using the elemental combat mechanics in the rest of Genshin Impact. And what I mean by that is simply that Anemo swirls it onto other units, and then maybe you're going to react with that element, whereas Geo just gives you a shield every time, and technically they absorb more damage of their type or whatever. So sure, I get what you mean, but at the same time, Geo does follow kind of a pattern. And so if we're going to give Geo a lot of reactions, the next question, as you said, was, are there any Geo combinations you'd like to not have reactions for, like other elements have, elements they don't react with? Yeah, I think that's sensible. You know, another way to look at this too is you could pick quite a few different ways what elements Geo will react with. I have kind of three for you, and then I'll just pick one. The first way would be to try to keep it similar to the design it currently has. So currently it's relatively parallel to Anemo. It has the same reaction with Pyro, Electro, Cryo, Hydro, and has no reaction with Anemo and Dendro. Just like Anemo has no reaction with Dendro and Geo, but has a reaction that's the same with the remaining four. You could keep it that way if you wanted to. Making there be a different reaction for every element, though, kind of feels like what Pyro, Cryo, Electro, and Hydro do, rather than what Anemo is doing. So you could make it more like Dendro, I guess, like more irregular, I suppose. More like Pyro, Cryo, Electro, Hydro. Or finally, you could make it more like Cryo specifically. Let me briefly explain. One of the reasons that I think looking at it, depending on how you look at it, it seems like Geo is more or less out of place, is that while there are a ton of other reactions on other elements, there are elements other than Geo that focus on like not reacting that much, like being kind of inert, I guess. It just kind of depends how you look at it. If you're looking for them, then yeah, Cryo and Electro to a lesser extent both have like less complex reactions in their design space. Geo, Cryo, and Electro are the three elements that have the most design in Genshin Impact that rewards just building more of that type of unit. For example, Kujosara and Goro both have passives that make their elements specifically crit damage higher. So Electro and Geo damage, respectively, only crit damage goes up. So they encourage you to run like a bunch of units of that type, right? Electro damage doesn't have the multiplicative, like you get an extra multiplier type reactions like Pyro, Cryo, and Hydro do with Melt and Vaporize. So Electro damage, it's like what you see is what you get. You can't do a reaction that will magnify that even further, just like Geo and Cryo only has the weaker direction of Melt. So they are elements that are a little more designed for you to just hit people. Additionally, while Electro has a reaction with Dendro, the super complicated new kid, Dendro and Electro's reaction is literally just you debuff the enemy so that when you do Dendro or Electro, it does more damage. It's like the least complicated of the, reaction-y reactions, I guess. Of the complicated reactions is the least complicated one. And I don't think that that is a coincidence. Cryo's reactions, generally, where I was going with this, are also quite... okay, so they seem complicated, but I think it's useful to get in the mindset of someone who basically isn't thinking about what they do or doesn't even know what they do, necessarily. If you just do the Cryo reactions, what do they do? Well, Cryo and Hydro freezes the enemy, primarily defensive, though if you shatter them, you do physical damage. Cryo and Electro, you get a physical damage resistance reduction. Now that's basically only useful if you don't have a super involved team that has already optimized out all of the physical damage. And so yeah, like these are reactions that will benefit a player that isn't focused on making an involved build. Even though Electro and Cryo are part of that group of four that like has a lot of different reactions, I would argue that you can see a pattern in those reactions that they are relatively less rewarding of a well-wrought team. They are more good if you put less effort into them and less good if you put more effort in. They have a higher floor and a lower ceiling. One more example I like is Electrocharged. Electrocharged is notorious for it being kind of unclear who owns the reaction. It's kind of difficult to have one character be doing all of the Electrocharge damage. And what's the benefit of that? Well, I mean, none, I guess, but if you don't know who in your team owns the reactions, or you don't even know about the mechanic of reaction ownership, well, what will happen? If you build a little elemental master on each character, you might be better off than someone who tries to have one character own all the reactions. Again, it's a very generalist balanced reaction, I would argue. Nearly every single one among the Electro, Cryo, and Geo reactions seems specifically tailored to be like a more general reaction, rather than being something you build around and get a huge benefit from that, or that requires much sequencing, or even allows much sequencing. And I do not think that's a coincidence. They basically all follow the pattern. Those elements are designed more to be like general use. So you could have Geo kind of stick to that. I basically just wanted to talk about different ways you could think about doing that, but let's just pick one for the sake of this video. So we have, yeah, again, like three options, I guess. You could keep Geo in the Animo group, so it doesn't react with Animo and Dendro, and it's going to have its own reaction with Pyro, Cryo, Electro, Hydro. You could put Geo in like the Cryo group. You know, it's going to have more simple reactions, and it's a little irregular. Like Cryo breaks the pattern with Pyro, Electro, and Hydro, where it doesn't react with Dendro. So you could do that. You know, have Geo basically just have arbitrary elements it reacts with, and it's much more focused on feeling a certain way, like simplified. That kind of feels like my design argument in part one, so I guess I won't do that. And then the third one would be to make it something like Dendro. You make it like another super complicated one. I'm also not going to do that. Let's just give it reactions with Pyro, Cryo, Electro, and Hydro, for now, anyway. That's still fairly complicated. Do we make it swirlable? How about a reaction with Dendro? We'll see what happens. I don't really have good ideas for all of these, so I'll just tell you what I have. One of them that I'm excited about is Pyro and Geo being slow, like lava, damage over time, and a slow. You can already like grass on fire, so I want the slow. That adds like a little something extra, I think. Magma, a magma field would be kind of cool. Maybe it does damage to you as well. Some pyro reactions, burgeon and burn, for example, have the theme of doing damage to you as well, the person doing the reaction. Maybe this magma field could be like that. I don't know, it would mirror the grass being on fire as well. That's interesting, and I think that a slow or some kind of utility effect for Pyro would be kind of cool. Area of effect damage on status effects is also kind of already in Pyro's wheelhouse, and also pretty rare generally, like not that many of those effects are that good, so it seems kind of, that seems fun, I don't know. Electro and Geo. You could have this be one of the ones that's an exception if you wanted to. You could say, oh, these just don't react, like Cryo and Dendro don't react for a flavor reason, you could argue. You know, it's cold and living things and they die in the cold or something. I personally think that isn't ultimately why my explanation about, well, Dendro is supposed to be the one for people who want really involved reactions, and Cryo is the closest to Geo at avoiding that design space, and that's why they maybe don't have a reaction, even though it's super awkward and breaks a pattern, and that hurts me. Anyway, you could do that. I think Electro and Geo sounds cool. I think it sounds like metal. Superconduct is a super contrived pseudoscience reaction, right? Why can't we have Electro and Geo be like some kind of, what do you get, super armor? Or maybe this is the Thorns effect. You know, when you take damage, damage pulses out from you for some reason. You are heavier, so you do more damage. It's just like a general damage percentage buff. Another idea is it could give you energy. In my notes, one of the things I wrote down as something you could do to make crystallized shields better generally would be for them to give you energy, like neutral energy particles. You just make them neutral energy particles, basically. You could do that. It's kind of awkward, but it would be a very fun effect for one of the Geo reactions. I also think that would add a lot, right? Like, not only is Electro already in the design space of granting energy, that is part of Electro's design space. You restore a certain amount of energy. Geo being an element that doesn't always add to your reactions, it feels kind of nice if it enables your other abilities too. That's quite nicely balanced as well. It's pretty overpowered if something that does tons of reactions also makes sure all your abilities keep going. So maybe that's a cool effect for good old Geo. So yeah, I think an energy restoration or like a super armor type effect, you get resistance to enemies interrupting your attacks or something. You get a shield, but I mean, one of them can still be you get a shield. You just make it a buffed shield, right? So Electro and Geo, I want to do something there. I think that's cool. You know, Geo and Dendro, were you to make Geo super reactive instead of whatever I'm doing here, you could have it be like, you know, something roots grow out of the ground, but now we're just making every single effect be Geo and whatever element creates a slow. With different effects, though, maybe that's not the worst idea. After all, Hydro and Geo, like quicksand or a mudslide, a slow. Cryo and Geo, how about an avalanche that knocks enemies over and does a bunch of damage all at once? Well, they're basically all just crowd control effects, which is a nice theme. Like, I don't think that's bad. I think the main problem is just getting them to do something, you know, different from each other. So for Geo, and let's just do Dendro. That breaks my pattern, but let's just do it. It doesn't matter. The pattern made no sense anyway. Maybe Dendro and Geo, you do roots, and it slows enemies or roots enemies. It holds them still, but it's also still Dendro, like it can burn. So you can react with it with Pyro, to still do Burgeon or Burning, perhaps. Something like that. If you wanted to go that route. We're just doing the complicated reactions thing in this section, so that's fine. You could do that. That's cool. Hydro and Geo, the mudslide thing. Maybe this one makes them root, like they're stuck in place. And again, kind of like the Dendro one, they still have Hydro. That could be part of Geo's gimmick, is it either slows them and you get an extra effect, or it outright stops them and you still have the element that you had before. So Geo becomes like still kind of a supplementary element, potentially, like not getting in the way of the reactions you were doing, but it still does something, which I would take a blind guess, Quartermaster Sea, you would like that type of design, even though I personally still favor just buffing Crystallize. This is still cool. I'm, part of the reason this section is fun for me is because I get to find out if I would change my mind. The answer is kind of, yeah, like this sounds fun. And then Cryo and Geo, you get an avalanche, like it does a big hit of damage. Maybe this one has really good damage scaling. And they get knocked over, they become prone or something, or it's like overloaded, but just with these two different elements, they get knocked backwards or something. I don't know. It could group enemies together, but that's really weird. And Animo's thing, whatever. Those are some fun reaction ideas. I like the idea that Geo has some kind of commonality between its reactions that makes it feel like there's less of a mental burden on the player, which brings me to part 3 and the end of the parlay, about thinking about maybe why they're designed this way exactly. And what I'm going to start with is that idea I just mentioned about like mental load or the mental burden. One of the other reasons that I didn't want to just hand wave the entire discussion, because it was a lot of fun, I hope you thought, about making Geo stay the same and be buffed or be a bunch of different things. One of the other reasons why I think it's nice for it to stay the same or have a similar effect among its reactions is the idea that it reduces cognitive strain. Like you can think about all the reactions and it's kind of less. Animo, I think, is a particular success in this regard. It's super effective whether you're into a lot of reactions, you're using it to swirl and enable a bunch of other reactions going off, or not, you're using it just to do resistance shredding for like an all cryo team except for one Animo unit, or an all pyro team except for one Animo unit. It's kind of good either way. It works for both types of players, but it does something incredibly simple. It just spreads the element, one of those core 4 elements. Brilliant. I think that's great. Very, very low cognitive cost. You don't have to think about what it does too much. Very high gameplay utility. You can do a ton of different stuff with it. It's useful to a lot of kinds of players. I think Animo is an excellent design. Very, very smart. And then Pyro, Cryo, Electro, Hydro, well, a lot of it does reduce the cognitive load. Like Pyro, Cryo, and Hydro, one of the most intuitive things in many games, if the game is basically any kind of physics system, is that fire will melt ice or like water will douse fire. And so the idea that you can do Cryo to Pyro to Pyro to Cryo, or Pyro to Hydro, and Hydro to Pyro, and it gives you more damage, like it's good because you did the combo, I think is fairly intuitive, even if the fact that it does more damage is like sort of weird. It feels straightforward that those things are good. You combined the things, Of course they react, a lot of players would think. Hydro, Electro, that's pretty intuitive. It would be like it would conduct electricity, right? And then Hydro and Cryo, the enemy freezes, of course, There's a little bit weirder with Pyro and Electro and Cryo and Electro, overloaded and superconduct, but it makes sense enough. Overloaded, like you have the two, aggressive elements, and so the enemy explodes. Sure, I guess, you know what I mean? It makes a certain kind of sense. And then we got one weirdo one. Superconduct is odd, but anyway. They're not super overwhelming, in my opinion. They did an okay job making it be that you don't have to keep too much in your head, just sort of intuitively understand what most of them do. They maximized, maybe you could say it this way, the number of elemental reactions that do what you would think they would do, basically. Dendro and Pyro is pretty intuitive as well. Like it burns. Enemies burn over time. And then there's only a few other weird ones, like Dendro Hydro, you make a core, and then Pyro makes the core explode. I guess bombs, sort of, but that doesn't really make any sense with Hydro and Dendro. But yeah, they look like bombs, I guess. And then Dendro Hydro, and you do Electro, it becomes a homing missile. Yeah, that's weird, but okay. And Dendro Electro, all the Electro reactions make no sense, but whatever, you get the point. I think they did a pretty good job with that overall. But when you look at the pattern between the reactions, I think my main takeaway here is, we've been talking about it as if, I've been talking about it as if, I won't blame you. The developers have like a sentence on the wall in their office that says, the purpose of different reactions is to have some that are complex and some that are more simple, so that players that want different levels of complexity will enjoy the game. So make sure that they're like that, and that any units in those elements are designed like that. There is no thing on the office wall at their office that says that. You know what I mean? Like, obviously there isn't. Yet at the same time, it's not like no one has ever said anything like that during the development of the game, right? The pattern is too pronounced for there to be like no philosophy about some reactions being more or less complicated, reactions kind of having groups. Dendro is sort of doing its own thing. Pyro, Hydro, and Electro, and mostly Cryo are doing their kind of a similar thing. And then Anemo and Geo are doing kind of a similar thing. From a game design perspective, they're designed like 3-ish ways, I guess you could say. Where exactly you put Cryo, I don't know. And they're kind of on a spectrum of how complex they are. Dendro, Pyro, Hydro, Electro, Cryo, Geo, and then I'm not sure where you put Anemo. It's meant to be kind of at the back, I guess, for most least complex. Cool. They definitely have thought that, but I don't think that there's like a rule that they all have to look at before anything is implemented in the game. They have to read the rule on the wall that says, you have to do the design this way. You know what I mean? My opinion about why it's kind of irregular, Geo, Electro, and Cryo kind of consistently have like if you do damage of this type, that's good, just put all characters of this type on a team. They kind of consistently have that design, but not that consistently. I think the reason is basically just not everyone is on the same page about that. You can't have a team with tons of people and have all of them be firmly rooted in doing things for a specific game design reason. You just can't. I hate to be so harsh and blunt by saying it this way, but it's also like you're not going to be able to hire that many, to be direct, good developers. And so that's why you also see like a real inconsistency in how complex constellation effects are. That's been sort of our pet complaint on Parlays about Genshin Impact. Some constellations are not good, but they're like not even anything. They just make the cooldown or the cost the same as what some units already have. While other constellations are not good or really relevant to the character, but they like are a piece of game design. This would be something like Diona has a constellation that makes her shoot charge attacks really fast, which has nothing to do with any of the rest of her kit and is not particularly useful if you do anything else with her. But it sure is a piece of design. It sure is a mechanic they implemented. You know what I mean? Why the one and then the other? Like what's going on there? I think the explanation is literally just different people made those, and to be plain, one of those designers is just better at game design, and so they came up with like something. I don't know. They were told it wasn't meant to kind of rock the boat, but they decided to make something. I don't know if that's really better or worse in my book, but that's the situation, I think. And so I don't know. I mean, I personally think that's why you see some of the inconsistency. Like, I'm not sure I'm totally convinced that having Cryo not have a Dendro reaction entirely makes sense. Like, I guess that fits the theme of Cryo being less combo-y. But another way to think of it is there might be some way weirder reason. Like, when Dendro was released, I could totally believe that the reason there's no Cryo reaction is literally to reduce the word count on Dendro-related stuff. Like, Dendro reacts in this complicated, involved way with Pyro, cryo, and hydro, pyro, hydro, and electro. But that's just a bit much, and so it doesn't do anything with cryo, animo, and geo. There are three whole elements where it just doesn't do anything. It's really meant to be kind of over there doing its own thing. I would be willing to believe that is why. And is it a coincidence which elements it doesn't react with? I do not think so. Two of them are the ones specifically designed to be like appealing to players who maybe aren't doing a bunch of combo stuff, according to my narrative. And then Animo, which is sort of the honorary one, like meant to appeal to everybody, but also partially for the players that aren't going to combo as much. I don't know. I think there's something there. I feel like there is reasoning that isn't related to the game going broad necessarily, why reactions are like inconsistent in this way. And another thing about Geo, I guess, is that by the very same narrative that you might agree with me or not, that Crystallize is intended to be a simple reaction because Geo is intended to be less complicated than the other elements because it's intended to appeal to characters that want less of that. Let's just say that's true. Well, if they do change it, the players that it's meant for won't know, because that's sort of the entire point of designing things for players that aren't involved in the game's kind of materials or going deep into the mechanics. So does that do anything for those players, you know? I would still argue it does. Having it just be better, even if they don't know consciously, will still make it feel better. And I mean, you can have your cake and eat it too here. I don't see why Crystallize can't be relevant to players that want to make an involved build, but still just serve its purpose for players that don't want that. It's already less powerful to build a team that doesn't do the elemental combos and stuff, so I don't really see a problem with buffing Geo either. Oh, right. That's right. The developers don't buff things in this game, do they? And that's kind of the final point I'll make before we go. Yeah, we don't get buffs directly to stuff in Genshin Impact. You know, I could see there being artifact sets that, you know, there'll be one artifact set that just buffs Electro and Geo, so they have a specific reaction that's like a metal reaction or something. And then there'll be another artifact set, another whole standalone artifact set that's just Pyro and Geo have a reaction. And I do not think this is a good way to do this, but the developers have decided, for reasons that are a topic for another time, because I don't know and it would be speculation, that they're not going to, you know, directly buff the various game design. I feel like they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater there, basically. I get not wanting to make balanced decisions in general, and you could argue that their unwillingness to do that is why we get relatively good balance from the start, from the get-go in Genshin Impact, which is good, but it's not necessary to insist on absolutely never designing things after they've been released. You're still going to get some things a bit off. There's just no need to not balance things up a little bit more after they're released, like ever. I get that they don't want to set a precedent. When I say I get that, I mean I get that they think that, not I get that that is important. I don't think it is. But yeah, I think that's the situation. I mean, I think it would be nice for Geo to stay as a kind of general option. I feel like that fits what Genshin Impact is going for, but that doesn't mean that it has to be weak. You could also make Geo have a bunch of different reactions. I would favor kind of a theme, like they're all crowd control focused or something. That could be cool. I admit I'm a lot more interested in that idea than I thought I would be when I first read your parlay, so that was delightful. Thank you for asking for that reason. It's always fun to write to find out what you think, and you gave me that, so thank you very much. That's one of my favorite things about parlay generally. And my final takeaway is that, again, there may be some frustratingly unrelated feeling to game design reasons why these things are the way they are that don't have much to do with, you know, I think they did intentionally make Geo less complex. It's not because they just like didn't, you know, they forgot or couldn't think of anything. It's because they on purpose, for a specific reason they could tell you, wanted it to be less complex. But exactly how codified that is, maybe not so much. And it may have kind of had a knock-on effect, like further lack in complexity for some elements may not have been fully intentional. Like there might have been some other intentional directly, like there might have been some other reason why that happened. Just as a thought. Thank you for asking. I hope this was a fun way to cover the subject. I tried to just do all of the things that I wanted to do covering it rather than one. So I hope that some of it was what you were looking for.